Hello everybody and welcome back. My name is Mel and today is the first of my SPFBO vlogs. I'm not gonna lie to you, I've already filmed this intro once, and when I started importing all of the footage and realized how long this vlog was gonna be, I decided that we needed to break this up into 2 books per vlog instead of what I was planning to do, which was somehow cram all 10 books into one vlog. Don't look at me. I don't know what past Mel was thinking. So this is going to be the first of my 5 vlogs for SPFBO. If you don't know what SPFBO is, it's the Self-Published Fantasy Blog Off, which is a contest of self-published authors, and it is hosted by Mark Lawrence. Every year they start off with 300 submissions and whittle that down to the final 10. I'm going to be reading the final 10. Cassidy has been following this pretty closely, and one of the things that both of us wanted a little bit more from this competition was structure. Completely see why it's not structured, but we thought it would be fun to give it some structure. So Cassidy got a bunch of everybody together, different bloggers, bookstagrammers, booktubers. She gathered everybody together. She came up with a rubric, and we're gonna do it Cassidy's version. And we have a rubric. I will be sharing that rubric with you guys to kind of walk you through why I am rating things what I am. The goal is to try to be relatively objective to make this as fair as possible. Of course, subjectiveness and my personal preferences will bleed into things, but hopefully this gives you guys a really good idea of whether or not you would like the book, even if you don't have tastes that are similar to mine. So I did make predictions, and I'm going to be, as we're doing this vlog, kind of showing you side-by-sides of my predictions and where things are actually ranking, because I think it's going to be way different. I think just based off of the synopsis, I got it all completely wrong, and we're about to see how this goes. Without further ado, I guess let's just jump into the vlog. Okay guys, so it is time. Let's pick my first read for the SPFBO vlog. Okay, so we got Small Miracles by Olivia Atwater. I don't have it in here with me, but I'll put it up on the screen so you guys can see it. This is one of the cozy mystery, not cozy mystery. This is one of the cozy fantasy reads, and I was a little bit scared of it, not gonna lie to you. It is one of the ones that I'm not sure if I'm really gonna like. As a matter of fact, I put it 9th on my ranking, and the large part of that is because it's just so cozy. It is about an angel that has basically racked up a bunch of debt, and in order to pay off their debt, they have to try to tempt a really, really good person into just doing a little bit of sinning. They don't want them to be like super sin, but to have more fun, essentially. And Gadriel is our angel of petty temptations, and the only way that they're going to pull this off is by some sort of small miracle. So Rachel has said that this reminds her a lot of The Good Place mixed with Good Omens. I've heard some people say that by reading the first chapter, I think it was Cassidy, that it kind of gave her a little bit of Lucifer vibes, so we'll see. Rachel ended up, she had it really, really low on her list, and she ended up giving it, I think, a 9 or something like that on the SPFBO rankings. So I'm really, really curious to see what that ends up looking like on my side, because Rachel does read a lot of like cozy mysteries and stuff, so she already knows that sometimes cozy works, whereas I don't read a lot of that, so I'm just assuming that cozy is not going to work for me, but I'm hopeful. So once we get started, I'll give you a couple of my updates, and then at the very end I will go through the entire rubric with you guys and walk you through each and every piece and why I'm ranking it the way that I am. We'll see what the final ranking comes out as, and fingers crossed, let's just pray that I enjoy it, because I'm really, really scared of it, and I'm not sure how this is gonna go. But we're gonna get started, we're gonna get this knocked out, and I will be back with an update probably tomorrow morning. Good morning, friends. Pardon the look, because Ollie and the little puppy were up very, very late last night, so we didn't get a ton of sleep, but I did want to update you on Small Miracles because I've gotten about 80 pages in, and it's relatively short, so I did want to go ahead and give an update. My initial thoughts is this is just not going to be for me. but that does not make it a bad book. The author has a very good writing style. I'm enjoying how easy her writing is. It's technically good. I don't see any clunkiness or major problems with it. However, it is a little bit more descriptive than I'm used to. The first chapter, she was telling us what everybody was wearing and what their places were in line. And I think it was relevant to the type of story that she's trying to tell, but it's just not my preferred style. We also have just kind of a meandering story, which I knew going in was probably going to be the case because it's described as a cozy fantasy. It's basically just talking about how you can have things that are plus virtue or minus sin, and your points theoretically should even themselves out. Hang on, we're about to die. Sorry, where was I? So your points should theoretically even themselves out, and you should be relatively well balanced on the sin to virtue scale. And I'm enjoying the discussions, but I just don't think there is enough discussion. It is a little bit too matter of fact in the way that it's dealing with things. And if you're truly going to have a discussion on this, I want it to be a little bit more of a philosophical discussion. But I do think that it is interesting enough. The plot just meandering is a little bit too slow and monotonous for me. I don't dislike it. I can definitely see why people would enjoy this. I can see the Lucifer comparison that Cassidy made because the main character does kind of remind me of that, but it's not anywhere otherwise the same. Either way, I see where the love comes from, but I don't think that love is going to be from me because of the type of story that it is. But we'll see. I could be surprised. There could be the last, half of the story could be, I don't know, could fix all of the things that I'm having a little bit of trouble with right now. I think that this is going to be one of those where we talked about before where it has a technically good rating, but the enjoyment scale is a little bit lower. We'll see. Trying to be very objective about this in the way that I'm thinking about things so that everything stays across the board similar, but enjoyment's going to play a role at some point. There's just no way around that. So I'm going to read some more today. I'm hoping I can finish it this afternoon, and then we'll move on to the next one. All right, everybody. So I have actually now finished Small Miracles. It really did not take me very long. It's a super, super quick read. I think I'm just going to, for these, give you a quick rundown of what I thought about the book overall, and then for each book, I'm going to go through the entire rubric with you guys, and we're going to fill it all out together so that you can kind of see why I'm thinking what I am and why I'm giving it the rating that I am. I think that will work well, and hopefully it does. I think that's the way we're going to do it. So for Small Miracles, I can see why people would really enjoy this book. If you're looking for something that is very character-driven, very heartwarming, has a message behind it, then this is really going to be something I think that works for you. If you're wanting something that is more fantastical and something that is got a lot of plot and a lot of drive, I think you would be a little bit bored in this one. I did appreciate the characters, and over the course of the book, I really started to enjoy Gadriel and learning about them and seeing how they were interacting with others. I didn't particularly connect with Ella or Holly, and so I think that did hurt the book a little bit just from an enjoyment standpoint for me. I think it was well written. I think it was relatively well paced, intentionally paced. There were a couple of things that I did not fully understand logically. There's a particular aspect of this book involving gender, and basically angels can change from one gender to the next extremely fluidly. But for some reason, the aspect of they can't be the same gender in the same room at the same time, I never fully understood. And so every single time it was brought up, and Gadriel had this weird obsession with it, every single time it was brought up, it just took me out of the story because I did not understand. I don't know why it was there, to be completely honest. It didn't really seem to add anything to the story. But overall, I was just a little bit bored in this one, but I do think that it is a technically strong book, and I can absolutely see where people would enjoy it. So with all of that kind of just initial thoughts and enjoyment being said, let's go through the rubric, fill it all out together, and see what we get. First thing we're going to talk about is the characters. So a couple of things that we were really trying to think about in this one is, for the characters, do their motives make sense for them and do they act their age? Do you feel for them and are they compelling to read about? I did feel for them and they were compelling, but not in a sense of making me super intrigued about the story. Okay, sorry about that. My camera died. Let's try this again. I think we were talking about, are the characters distinguishable from each other? And I would say yes. I think they have their own voices pretty well for the most part. Do you understand them? Are they nuanced versus flat characters? I think you could say that they were nuanced. I did understand them, but the motives were very predictable. It was a very cut and dry story. I didn't feel like the characters had any significant depth. I think this story would have hit a little harder if they had had a little bit more depth. And then the side characters, not just the protagonist, could you describe them as a friend? Not really. I would say that the side characters were much less fleshed out than the main three characters were. You could definitely tell that a lot of the focus was on the 3 to 4 main characters. I think that we're somewhere between a 7 and an 8 on this one. So I'm actually just gonna hit right in the middle and we're gonna give it a 7.5. And then for plot, does it make sense? Are there plot holes, plot conveniences? I think there was one particular thing at the end that was supposed to bring it to a plot and was supposed to be kind of like this plot twist that explained everything. For me, it felt a little bit convenient and a little bit rushed because it was brought into the last 20% of the book, and I don't necessarily feel like, while I think the author tried to give you the little Easter eggs in the beginning of the story that would explain this further on, to me, I don't know that they did a perfect job with that, but now that I'm talking about it, I do remember there being a few little things here and there that could hint more toward it. So I would say probably about 65% yes on that one. The pacing, I think, was slow, but intentionally so. So I think it was done well. It was not uneven. I was just a little bit bored. So that's good there. The foreshadowing, hidden Easter eggs, that's the thing that I was complaining about before. I think that they were there. They just weren't quite enough for me. Was it satisfying and was it unique? No. It really wasn't. This was a story that I've read before. It's a message that I've seen in a lot of other books, so I would not call it unique, but I don't think it was intending to be. But if we're looking at the rubric and the satisfying, I think it did have a satisfying conclusion. I think it was intended to be what it was, but it was not unique. If there were plot twists, were they done well or was it too predictable? It was not too predictable, but again, the ending and that plot twist, I guess is what you could call it, was a little too convenient for me. So for plot, is it a 6 or a 7? I'm trying to be objective and think about how it actually was versus how I felt, because I felt like it was a little bit rushed. But is that me or is that the book? So I think I'm gonna do a middle of the road again and do a 6.5. That feels comfortable for me because I'm not really sure if it was 75% good and 25% bad, but it was better than 50-50. And then for writing, the prose, does it work? Were there editing issues? The prose was very well done. The themes, content, does it make sense for the genres or subgenres? Absolutely, it does. There were consistent word choices. It was very precise. The dialogue was well executed for the writing style. It was a little bit, at times, unnatural to me, but it fit the style of the story. And then the author left most things explained, most things clear, and didn't give me a ton of unneeded information. There were footnotes, and I feel like at times those footnotes were a little bit unnecessary. And then the one thing that we just talked about the gender being in the same room thing, I don't feel like was super explained. But for the most part, I think that this one did have a lot of really good things as far as the writing goes. I think that she did that very well, so we're gonna give that one an 8. So setting is both setting and world building. In this one, I don't feel like, because it's a cozy fantasy, we had a lot of world building. It is an urban, it's set in our world. I do feel like it did a decent job trying to explain angel culture, for lack of a better way to put it. So I think the atmosphere worked well. I think that it did a good job immersing readers into the story. Didn't do as good of a job for me, but that's because I wasn't interested in the type of story. The magic system, does it make sense and did I understand it? For the most part, it did. That was just that one thing that I was like, wait, huh? Do the rules work or do they contradict themselves? There weren't really any rules. I mean, they do talk about rules, but not in the sense of a world building setting, so that wasn't really an issue. Could you picture the setting? Was there depth to it? It's our world, and it wasn't intended to be an overly atmospheric book. It was supposed to have those warm vibes, and I think it did a good job with that. The timelines made sense. I would say that it is pretty similar to other things that I've read before, but that's just, I mean, it's our world. That is just kind of the nature of it. So I feel like the setting was really good too. We're gonna give that one an 8 as well. So world building is gonna be an 8. Writing, the more I think about it, the more I want to up that rating. I almost want to give this one a 9. I think I'm trying to be a little bit more objective about it, and I think it was done well and intentional. And that's the thing you're gonna keep hearing me say about this one, is it wasn't necessarily to my taste, but it was very intentional. So enjoyment. Personally, I was bored for the majority of this story. At the end, I did see the wholesome vibes. It was cute, it was fun, it got the message across. Probably 80% of this book, I was quite bored. So I think I'm gonna give this a 6. It's more good than bad, but it's just not to my taste. But for the most part, I enjoyed it more than I didn't. So I think a 6 is pretty good there. And that gives me an overall of a 7.4, which is a 3.5 star, which seems very reasonable to me. I think I'm okay with that. Again, hopefully that helped. It forces me to be a little bit more objective about things, and I think that's good. That's a good rating, and I'm happy with it. I'm not super surprised by it. I think that technically, very, very good book. Did exactly what it meant to do. It just wasn't my style. So unfortunately, the enjoyment score did bring it down some. But again, we expected that. Anyway, I'm done talking. I'm done talking about this. Let's go ahead and see what my next read is going to be. I've taken out Small Miracles so that that does not pop up again. So let's just spin the wheel and see what we get. Ooh, the 13th Hour. That is one that I have had pretty high up on my predictions list. I can't remember exactly where it was sitting, and I'm gonna put up my predictions somewhere here so that you guys can kind of see where it sat versus where it is now. But I'm excited about that one. It is a longer one, but I've been hearing some good things about it. So I will touch base with you guys once I've started the 13th hour. Hey guys, okay, so I have decided that I'm kind of going to do this ranking just a little bit differently. We're playing with how we're going to do these next few vlogs, so bear with me. But after I sat on Small Miracles for a little while, my ratings did change a little bit, and so I wanted to really quickly go through what they would be or what they are now that I've had time to kind of sit and think and talk about it a little bit more. So for characters, we originally had a 7.5. I think that a 7.5 is still pretty strong, but I do think that it's going to bump down a 0.5 point to a 7. The side characters for me just were not quite as strong as I wanted them to be. While Gadriel was really, really good, I wanted a little bit more depth from Holly and was it Ella, the bookie, just a little bit more from them. So I think that I'm gonna bump that one down to a 7. And then for plot, we originally had a 6.5. The more I sit on this one, the more that I do feel like I overall enjoyed the plot, even though it wasn't my style. So I'm gonna bump this one up, I think, to a 7, because I think that a 6 it's okay, more good than bad. A 7 is good, 75% good, and 25% bad, and I think that's the case. While I was a little bit bored with the plot, it was still had merit. For world building, we originally had an 8, and I'm leaving that alone. I'm not gonna change that one. For writing, we originally had a 9, and I think for me, I'm gonna bump that one down just a little bit. I think that Rachel's praise of the writing was playing into my rating just a little bit on that one, and so we're gonna bump that one down to an 8. I think that the prose was good, but there were some issues with things being left a little bit unexplained, so I think we're gonna go with an 8. It was great. There were a lot of great things. And then for enjoyment, I originally gave it a 6 because there were parts that I was relatively bored on. And so I think I was a little bit harsh maybe on that rating originally. And I think I'm going to give it a 7. The more that I think about it, in the end, I liked the message. I liked where everything went. So I think that it was really good. And overall, I'm going to give it a 7.4. So while this book was not my style of book, I still think it worked really well, and I think that it did cozy very, very well. I probably wouldn't have picked it up on my own. It's not a book that I'm going to reread, but I had a good time with it. So overall, everything came out at a 7.4, and I'm pretty happy with that. The funny thing is, when I go and adjust my ratings a little bit, everything ended up coming out in the end exactly the same as it was on my initial. It's just different things are weighted a little bit differently now. So that's kind of funny that it came out at exactly the same after I sat on it, even though I shuffled around a little bit of the individual rankings. So that's kind of cool. That means that my gut must have been pretty right. I'm still trying to figure out exactly how I want to do these vlogs because the rubric is new to me, and I want to make sure that I'm giving you guys the best and most thorough rating. So I'm going to get off of here. Cruel Gods is up next, or the 13th hour, I'm sorry. The 13th hour is up next. Once I've read a little bit of it, I'll check back in. Okay, everybody. So I have just gotten home from work. It's been a long couple of weeks, and so this is taking me longer than I thought it would. Not because it's a bad book, but just because I've been really busy and I need to read it physically. So just to kind of give you guys a brief overview of what this is about, this is the 13th hour, or part of the Cruel Gods series. It's kind of confusing based off of the way that the cover is done. And I found it to be a little bit of a rough start. So the reason that I'm having to read it physically is I did start this on audio, and the audio is just not my favorite. I find that the narrator is trying to do too many different voices rather than just doing a solid narration, and it's a little bit distracting. It's not unlistenable by any means, but it's enough that I felt like it was inhibiting my enjoyment a little bit. And considering this is supposed to be a really objective SPFBO read, because I was noticing problems with the audiobook itself, I decided that I really needed to read as much of this as I could physically. I will still have to listen to the audio a little bit, but for the most part, I want to read this one physically. So because of that, it slowed me down a little bit. I am overall enjoying the story. I'm about 50% now, and I will say it took until about part 2 for me to feel like Trudy Skies really settled into the vibe of what they wanted this book to be, how they wanted the pacing to go, how they wanted to write the story, write the characters, and just really settle into the plot and the setup. Once we got to that point, it really took off, and I'm enjoying it a lot so far. I find that the races are very interesting. The world is really well developed and really well set up. At the beginning, the characters sounded a lot alike. I had a difficult time differentiating between the two, but as we've gone on, I do feel like they've gotten a little bit more of their own voice. I'm enjoying it. It's not going to be a 5-star read, but I am having a good time with it, and so I'm hopeful for the last half of the book to see where everything ends up and how it all plays out. This is a part of a series, and I know that the second book is already out, so if I enjoy this one, I do definitely plan to pick up book 2. The next time you guys hear from me, it will be to kind of finish out the vlog and to go over the rubric and how exactly I'm going to be rating this one. But so far, so good, and I'm really, really hoping I can finish this maybe tomorrow. We'll see. Don't hold me to that. You're never going to know, but I'm going to try. So I'll touch base again once I've finished this one, and we'll go through it very detailed through the rubric. Hey guys, so it is time to wrap up my thoughts on The 13th Hour by Trudy Skies. I did not do a very good job explaining what this book is about to you, so really quick, we are following Kale, who is part of the Godless, and she wants nothing to do with her god, nor do any of the Godless. They believe that if you pray to the gods, then you die. And this is all set on a world called the Chime, which is the mortals' domain. So their gods don't really have any dominion there, but they do have police essentially that are kind of maintaining order, and you cannot sin. So you cannot blaspheme against your god, you cannot denounce your god for any other god, and essentially all of these people under these gods are different races. The book opens with our godless trying to get people out of their godly domain into Chime, and trying to protect them from these workhouses, essentially. And then we also have another point of view from Quinn, who is one of the wardens, and he is a diviner that can control time, see bits of the future, bits of the past. And we don't really know what his motive is, but we know that he is looking for the godless. We also have a plot kind of running in the background of all of that that does become a much bigger thing throughout the book, and there are diviners dying. When a person dies, their soul goes straight back to their god, so there's no body left. But now there are bodies being left behind, which means that their souls are not returning to the gods like they're supposed to. So we're trying to figure out why all of this is happening and how everything is interconnected. I will say that I really enjoyed this one. I had a great time with it. It did take a little bit of time for me to feel super invested, but overall, I had a really good time with it. It does have its flaws, and I think it's going to be interesting at seeing how my scores shape out, considering I had a good time, but I do recognize that there are flaws to this, so I'm curious to see how that ends up looking when we talk about the rubric. I'm not going to go through this in quite as much detail as I did the first time around because you guys have already heard all of the questions and the rubric. I will link it down in the description box to Cassidy's website, and it will be listed there in case you guys want to follow along with me. First thing on the rubric that we're going to talk about is characters once again. I really enjoyed our two main characters. In the beginning, they kind of felt like the same person, but as we went on in the book, I do feel like they slowly started to get a little bit more of their own personality, and I did enjoy reading about them. There were certain motives and things from time to time that I was like, I'm just not 100% sure that that makes sense to me. I don't know that there's been enough explanation behind it, but overall, I enjoyed reading about them. I felt like they were compelling, but the characters definitely aren't the show of this story. I will say that the side characters are not very strong. We did have the godless, and I really wanted to know more about them and about their domains, but this book was already quite long, and I think that Trudy Skies just felt like she couldn't really explore that without too much added page count, which I get. But unfortunately, because of that, the godless did not play a big role in the beginning of the book, and then in the latter half tried to bring them in a really prominent role, but we hadn't learned enough about them and hadn't learned about those friendships and those relationships well enough for me to care about some of the things that shaked out in the end, if that makes sense. So I think for characters, I am going to go with either a 7 or a 7.5. I think that it was mostly good, but there was definitely some work that could be done in the characters. And then for plot, overall, I had a really good time with the plot. I was compelled by it. For the most part, I felt like there weren't a lot of plot holes or plot conveniences. However, speaking back to characters, there was one particular character that I did feel like was there mostly as a plot device. I'm curious to see if they play a much bigger role in the second book, and I think that they will. I think that there was the attempt to try to shape a background story for this character, and I don't want to tell you who it is because I do feel like that's a bit of a spoiler. But in the end, I felt like we tried to give them a backstory and a little bit more autonomy. For most of the story, they felt like a bit of a plot device. So I don't think that that's going to play too strongly into my rating because I do feel like it's going to shape out into the second book. But at the same time, I haven't read the second book, so I really have to rate things based off of the information that I have right now. And she felt like a little bit of a plot device, so kind of like a half a point issue there because I can see both sides of things. So moving back into plot, I don't think that there were a ton of plot holes or a ton of plot conveniences. Of course, there were a few, but it wasn't anything that was glaringly obvious to me. For the most part, the pacing was pretty well done. We had a pretty decent chunk of setup in the beginning before the ball really got rolling on the plot, but it wasn't horrible. There were moments where I kind of felt like we were doing a little bit of a roller coaster. Foreshadowing, hidden Easter eggs, they're there, but there's not that many of them. I felt like everything was relatively straightforward to me. I didn't necessarily feel like there was any plot twist or anything like that. It was predictable in where things were going to go and who was going to play what role in the end. The plot in and of itself is relatively unique. I won't say that I've not seen these devices and this idea before, but the way that it was done, I would say, is pretty unique. So I think for the plot, I'm actually going to give it an 8. I had a good time with it. For writing, the prose worked well for me. It did take me a little bit of time to settle in. There were bits that were a little more repetitive, some dialogue that felt a little clunky and not quite as natural, but I do think that the author settled into that well, and I think part of that may have been the audiobook, because I started with the audiobook, and then when I moved into the physical book, I did not notice those problems quite as much. I think the themes and content made sense for what the plot was trying to tell. We were really hammering home that theme of sort of religion and sin and how all of that plays into immortal beings and why you would feel such a kinship and such a loyalty to a god that is horrible to you. So I do think she did a good job conveying that. I do think that the imagery is clear. It was pretty consistent. We've already talked about the dialogue, and for the most part, the author left things explained and there wasn't a ton of unneeded information. So I think for this one, I'm probably going to give it a 7.5. I do think that there was more good than bad. Okay, then moving into the setting and the world building, this is where I think that the author really did shine. This is a world that was really hard to pull off, and there were moments where I wish we had seen a little bit more of the steampunk, or seen a little bit more of the magic in the background behind all of the different races and what they were capable of doing. But again, she was trying to pack a lot into this story, which is part of the reason that the plot did not get like an excellent, is because she was doing a lot. And at some points it felt like too much and too predictable because she was trying to do too much. But for the most part, I think she did well with that. And I could end up dropping the plot a little bit to a 7.5. We're going to circle back to that in a minute. But back to the world building, I digress. I think that the author did a really good job with the setting and the world building. You did get to see different parts of realms and why they were the way that they are. I think she did well with that imagery. I think she did well with setting up 12 different races. That was pretty hard to do. I think she did well with just conveying this world overall. Sure, there were things that could be improved upon and things that I would have liked a little bit more explanation of, but for the most part, I think that it did a lot of really great things, and so I'm going to give it an 8.5. And then for enjoyment, this is one where I had a good time. I can see the flaws. I can recognize the flaws. They're there, but for the most part, I had fun. It was a book that was easy for me to read. Once I got moving, it was one that I did not mind picking back up. I wanted to know what was going to happen. Even though I felt like I kind of knew where the story was going, I still wanted to know how it all played out. There were things that I did not particularly love. Some of the romance subplots felt a little bit forced and not entirely necessary. Some of the loyalties felt a little bit forced, not entirely necessary. But for the most part, I had a really, really good time with this, and I think I'm gonna have to give the enjoyment, I think it's going to be an 8. After I sit on it, it could get rounded up to an 8.5. I do want to kind of sit on that one a little bit. Okay, I'm back. I had to just kind of sit here and stare at this for a minute, look at the rubric again, and kind of shake out how I was exactly feeling about this book. But I think I've gotten it to a point where I'm pretty happy with it. Again, I am going to sit on it, but I think I'm pretty happy with this. Characters are a 7. I feel like they were strong, but not amazing. Plot 7.5, strong, but there were flaws in where things kind of lulled at points, and the predictability and just kind of the fact that I knew exactly where the story was going. The world building, I think, is an 8.5. The atmosphere was really good for me. The writing, I think I'm going to leave at a 7.5. It was really, really good as well, but not perfect. And then enjoyment, I think, is going to be an 8. I had a really good time with it. It was great. Just a lot of fun. So that leaves it at a 7.7, which I think comes out to a high 3. It feels like somewhere between a high 3, low 4 to me, just mostly based on enjoyment alone. So objectively, that seems very reasonable to me. So 7.7, this puts it above Small Miracles by a few points. And you are going to notice that a few tenths of a point are going to make a big difference here in these scales. I think it was great. I had a good time with it, and I think if you are somebody that likes a unique world, more plot-driven story, and just want something to have a lot of fun with, then this would be a good book for you. If you are a super character-driven person and you need a lot of character development in your books, maybe not the strongest book for you. I think that wraps it up. I will put my predictions versus actuality somewhere right through here so that you guys can kind of see what we're looking like with the first 2 books. I'm excited to continue. There are 8 more to go, and I'm really curious to see how all of this shakes out in the end. If I do make any changes to my ratings after I've had a minute to kind of sleep on it and think about it, I will let you know, and it'll reflect in the scores that I'm showing you as far as the ranking goes. But for the most part, I think everything is going to stay pretty similar. We saw that when I did the redo with Small Miracles. I did change a few things, but the rating ended up exactly the same. So I think we're going to be looking at some pretty similar stats even after I sit on it for a little while. But anyway, I've been talking long enough. I'm going to finish up editing this vlog and get it up for you guys. But I hope you had a ton of fun. Let me know down in the comments if either of these books are something that, first of all, you've read or would be interested in. I would absolutely love to know your thoughts. Once again, thank you so much to Cassidy for putting this rubric together and gathering us all together to do this project. Her website with everyone's rankings and thoughts is going to be linked down in the description box below, so go check it out, along with her channel, of course. But if you've been here, then you've seen her channel before. So go check all of that out. Give her some love. As always, you guys can find my links to my Instagram, Twitter, Goodreads, and Patreon all in the description box below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, subscribe if you want it, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.